Welcome, fellow horror hounds, and welcome to the 5th episode of Talk and Stalk, your unholy home for horror. I'm your host, Barry. This is my corrupted co-host, the sadist Samuel.
I think you can look good, sir. Welcome indeed, all of you unlucky souls. Join us into our dark descent into the infamous, the notorious, the unseen, and even the obscene.
Now, today's topic of discussion is, I thought it was only fitting to be doing a podcast on Scream 2. Now, obviously, we did a podcast on Scream almost a week ago, and I just thought it would be perfectly fitting to follow it up with this. Scream 2 is a film that I think, as horror movie sequels go, I actually think it's one of the better examples out there. I think it's a film that certainly holds up very well to the first movie. What's your thoughts on Scream 2 overall, Samuel?
To be honest, considering of how much was essentially against it, with the fact that most of its script was eventually leaked and the production was rushed, it blew me away.
Yeah, it's the thing is, I mean, yes, Scream was a big success. It quickly became the highest-grossing slasher film of all time, and a sequel, I would say, was pretty much inevitable. And Scream 2 came out just under a year after the first movie. In fact, while Kevin Williamson was actually writing Scream, he'd already come up with an idea for Scream 2. He felt, though, this is a story that can certainly be expanded on. And just 6 months after Scream was released, Scream 2 actually went into production. And it's gone on to become, obviously, a 4-film franchise. Scream 2 is the only film within that franchise, I'd say, that really does kind of hold up to the first movie. As you've said, from what I know, a lot of the cast were actually, the whole cast weren't actually told as to who the killer was. It was only, I believe it was the last day of production. There were actually 10 pages, the final 10 pages of the script were actually kept away from the cast, and they were actually signed a contract as well to actually,
sworn to secrecy.
Sworn to secrecy. There were apparently, like you just said, there were apparently some leaks online. I know that there were actually rumours. There's going to be spoilers in this. There's going to be spoilers in this podcast. But there were actually rumours going around that Derek, Sydney's boyfriend, and Hallie, a roommate, were actually going to be the killers. And it's reported that this was all changed due to the leaks and so forth. So yeah, this film had a lot to live up to. And this is a film I was really excited for. I watched Scream over and over again on VHS, and unfortunately I wasn't old enough to actually go and see Scream 2 at the cinema. Because I was, I would have been 15 at the time, I think, 15, 16. It was released in 98 in the UK, and I didn't look a day over 10, so I thought there's no point trying to get in there. So I had to wait for it to hit VHS, and obviously I did. Watched it as soon as it came out on VHS, and watched it with my brother late one night, and loved it. Do you remember your first viewing of the film, Samuel?
It was a couple of years after watching the first Scream. I was in Florida, and we just used we had the VPN to use the US's version of Netflix, which the library is absolutely incredible. Found the Scream films, and I thought, let's set it down and sit down and finally watch it. So, unfortunately, it was a small screen experience. It's one alongside the first Scream I've been dying to watch on the big screen. However, I'm glad that the experience was eventually met.
Yeah, and quickly, to kind of get the ball rolling and everything, the first Scream, obviously its opening has actually become quite iconic now. It was a hell of an opening. How do you top that? How do you create an opening that's going to really hold up to that first movie? And I really think they did a great job in Scream 2. I think the opening, I'm not saying it surpasses the first movies, but I certainly think it's every bit as impactful. What's your feelings on the opening to this movie?
I have to admit, I wasn't necessarily expecting. Well, it's not that I wasn't expecting anything. However, I was ready for almost anything. I loved the setting in the cinema, and I think the way that the crowd was something that you'd find at the Scala Cinema. The enthusiasm was absolutely unbelievable, and to have one of the murders, right in the row of the audience, I think is daring. It was absolutely unexpected and brilliantly executed.
It is. I mean, the opening's quite harrowing, actually. Jada Pinkett's murder, where she looks to the audience, the screams, the use of music that accompanies the scene. It's a hell of a gut punch opening, and it must be noted as well. Just going to touch upon this briefly. Is that Scream was actually criticised, somewhat for having no African American characters in it. And clearly, for Scream 2, they wanted to change that right from the get-go with casting Jada Pinkett and Omar Epps, the first two victims in the film. Gail Weathers' new cameraman, Joel, and obviously Sydney's new best friend and roommate, Hallie. It was clear from the start that, there was criticism that there were no African American characters in this film, and then wham, because it's interesting, because one of the discussions I actually had with Jada Pinkett and her boyfriend at the start of the film is the use of African Americans in these kind of movies, etc. It makes commentary about it right from the get-go. But yeah, like you said, the cinema setting I thought was great, and I mean, you can't really get much more meta. Somebody is killed during, it's a film within a film, the stab, the movie within a film, which I believe was actually done by Robert Rodriguez, wasn't it? Who apparently directed it.
Well, to be honest, you're the one who informed me on this, so I'll take your word for it.
Yeah, it's credited as Robert Rodriguez. Obviously, you got Heather Graham, haven't you, playing the role of Casey Becker in the opening scene, and of course, there's one other scene from the film, that Randy and Dewey scene. I love that. I thought that was a great piece of meta, because if you remember in the original Scream, Tatum actually says to Sydney, she says, "If this was a movie, who'd play you?" And she said, and Dewey says, "Well, I see you as a young Meg Ryan myself." And she says, "Well, thanks, Dewey, but knowing my luck, I'll get Tori Spelling." And lo and behold, who do they have as Sidney Prescott in Stab? Tori Spelling.
I thought that was a stroke of genius in itself. There were also, speaking of commentary, there were two things. One's commentary, one of them is just another reflection on Craven's sort of mindset, is the constant reminder, even from the boyfriend, it's just a movie, which, that's not paraphrasing the tagline to Craven's debut, The Last House on the Left, it's only a movie. But there was a line that a character in the background said, "Oh, it's based on true murders," which, Scream took some inspiration from the Gainesville Ripper murders. And no, come to think of it, there is a perversity with horror, that some of the atrocities we see on screen are based on real life. But we'll talk about that a little bit later, actually. Yeah. I don't want to dive into that just yet. However, that's the starting point to some of the themes that are within this film.
Yeah, Scream was very loosely based on Danny Rowland, aka the Gainesville Ripper, who claimed that an evil spirit called Gemini possessed him. He'd clearly watched Exorcist 3. That's where he got that name from. I'm just wondering. This is one thing that I've always wondered as well. It's just a little thing, has no real relevance to the plot, and I don't think it's ever been confirmed. But if you remember, where I believe his name is Steve, I'm pretty certain it's Steve. I'm probably wrong there, but Jada Pinkett's boyfriend that is killed in the toilet. The toilet in that film it's kind of all Egyptian hieroglyphics and Egyptian symbols. Did you notice that?
No, actually, no.
Yeah, now I'm just wondering, again, this is probably just me theorising. Well, one of Wes Craven's favourite horror films is The Tenant, the 1976 film, Roman Polanski. he's a big fan of that. He was a big fan of that film. And in the bathroom, in The Tenant, there's Egyptology everywhere, hieroglyphics, etc. And I don't know if that's a little nod to The Tenant or not. I really don't know. I don't think it's ever been confirmed or not.
Well, that's one hell of a theory. I'll give you that one.
Yeah, I've always wondered. But yeah, the casting with this movie again. You know, Sidney Prescott, Neve Campbell. Personally, I think she's a great scream queen. This time, you've got obviously as a boyfriend, you've got Jerry O'Connell, Sarah Michelle Gellar in a smaller role, but a fairly memorable one. You've also got, obviously, David Arquette and Courtney Cox reprising their roles. Obviously, David Arquette, Dewey survived the first movie. Randy's back. Who else have you got? Timothy Olyphant in his movie debut. I thought Timothy Olyphant was great in this film. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely. There was a tinge of, I'll call it, with manic in that. I love his sort of competitive nature with that of Randy, particularly when it came to the argument with sequels. He's got, and then what was it? It was at the party. They're arguing about sequels, and then he says, "Empire Strikes Back." Andy just casually goes, "Well, no, it's not a sequel. It's a part of a planned trilogy," and his face drops.
Yeah,
that was a good start. I like that there were elements where it was kind of similar to that of Stu's performance, by Matthew Lillard's performance, but it wasn't as over the top. There was something more sort of much more deranged, particularly with, I guess you could say, the character's motive, if we want to call it that.
Yeah, I liked Cece's remark to Mickey, actually, when she says somebody's got hard on for Cameron, because he obviously mentions Terminator 2 and mentions Aliens, which are, let's face it, two of the best sequels of all time, and two sequels that you could say are arguably better than the first. Of course, Joshua Jackson's character brings up House 2, the second story, in a sarcastic comment, because that is quite simply probably one of the worst horror sequels I've seen. And then, interestingly, you know, Jamie Kennedy's Randy actually brings up The Godfather Part 2, which is widely regarded as being one of the greatest sequels, if not the greatest sequel of all time.
Unfortunately, Randy also misquotes a film. It actually breaks my heart. So one character brings up Aliens. It says, but she says that line, "Get away from her, you bitch." But then Randy corrects him, saying, "Actually, I think the line is stay away from her, you bitch." You're like, no, the other guy was right. It hurts.
And the thing is, right, though, The Godfather 2 is a sequel, but some people actually argue it's actually part prequel as well. Because over a quarter of that movie actually focuses on the young Corleone, played by Robert De Niro, who deservedly got an Oscar win for that film. So it is a sequel, but it's also part prequel, Godfather Part 2. Speaking of that party scene that you were talking about, there's actually, now I did not know this until just a few years back, there's actually a blink and you'll miss it cameo from Matthew Lillard.
Which wouldn't surprise me, because, feel free to correct me, both him and Neve Campbell were seeing each other at that time.
They were dating, and he actually visited her on set sporting bleached blonde hair, and he can actually be seen in the background just for a few seconds, that's it. Very, very easy to miss. But he's in the background, and he actually hugs Mickey, interestingly. Is that like a little one killer to another?
I'll have to double check that. The one casting that we haven't mentioned yet is Liv Schreiber.
I was actually going to get onto him next. Yep, he was next in line. Liv Schreiber is an actor I really like. This was probably only the second or third film I'd seen him in, and as Cotton Weary, who obviously made just a tiny little appearance in the first film. Obviously, the man falsely accused of murdering Sydney's mother. He was the prime suspect for me in this film. What about you?
I did question it, but it's just, after revisiting it, his desire for wanting the attention of the news. At first, there was something actually I found unsettling about that, because of the craving of attention that some killers in real life have. I think there's notorious examples that we could talk about perhaps a little bit later. However, I think for me, he was a case of, nah, he's too obvious. Why would he? For me, I always kept questioning. He didn't murder the first time. Why would he want to murder now?
I know.
And thankfully, my suspicion, thankfully, my commitment to not believing he's the killer actually came to be.
Yeah. He was a suspect, but at the same time, it was like I thought he might be in cahoots, because obviously the first film, the big kind of twist was, two killers, and I thought to myself, there's a good chance there could be two killers in this film. Now, let's talk about quickly David Warner. Only a small role. David Warner, a very established, acclaimed actor, cast as obviously the drama teacher that obviously casts Nev Campbell in the role and so forth. I actually read this a while back that Wes Craven was really acclaimed, really did like David Warner as an actor, and he'd liked him ever since he saw him in the 1976's The Omen, and he'd always wanted to cast him in a film. And he finally got his role in Scream 2. Now, did you know that David Warner auditioned for the role of Freddy Krueger?
That is something I didn't know. I could see it though. I do. As absurd as it sounds, I do believe that, considering it came out, was it 13 years as before Scream 2?
Yeah. And yeah, one other big cast member I think we really should talk about is one of the killers, Laurie Metcalf, Billy Loomis's mother.
That's a twist and a half, though. I'll give them that. That is one hell of a twist.
Never suspected her. She obviously appears in a few scenes in the film. She crops up here and there, and you kind of watching in hindsight, you look back and think, I should have probably sussed this. I should have probably worked this out, but no, I did not upon first viewing. And I like the echoes of Mrs. Voorhees.
Oh, not even that. I'd even say Norma Bates as well.
Yeah, a whole kind of, she's out there to avenge the death of her her dead son. And, little clues like Gail says to her at an earlier point in the film. I thought I'd recognised you. Just a little subtle little hint. You don't really think nothing of it.
And I think that leads on, actually, now we've mentioned both the killers with Debbie Salt and Mickey. The motives of both the killers are very unsettling, because they are grounded in a sense of realism. So I think we talked about this beforehand. I actually do think that a lot of the subject matter, the tone, and the topics in Scream 2 are much more mature and much more darker than they are in Scream 1. Because Scream 1 is more parodic on the slasher films and the whole joking of, if this was a scary movie, I'd be the real suspect. Right? Then in Scream 2, it's far more grounded in reality because of the references to the likes of real serial killers. And so the motives, of course, for Timmy Olyphant's character are, based off, I'm going to blame all the movies and such, which was a moral panic. Let's not forget that for decades, it's always been that films have been, violent videos have been the scapegoat, whether it be the video nasties, moral panic, whether it be the horrific murder of James Bolger. Even Scream at times was accused of inciting copycat crimes, not to mention the Columbine massacre. Even last year, people were scared that Joker, the Todd Phillips film, was going to incite violence. It's a trend that's always been there. And so that, that character really taps into that. And then to have Debbie Salt, there's a line she says about, I'm sick of everyone. And the scary thing is, when you look at some of these serial killers, actually, no, the parental factor actually plays a really big part, whether it be Ed Gein, Ted Bundy, Jeffrey Dahmer, John Wayne Gacy, Jerome Brudos. Ed Kemper is a particular example as well.
Yeah. David
Berkowitz, the son of Sam.
Yeah, who, of course, Randy actually mentions, he throws in OJ there as well, doesn't he? During the film, he actually mentions, he gets cut off before he gets to finish, son of Sam, obviously, David Berkowitz, the .44 killer. But he does mention, who is it? It's Manson, who obviously wasn't a serial killer, but a cult leader and somebody with basically celebrity status. Was Bundy the other one?
Yeah, so it went Manson, Bundy, OJ, and Bundy in itself is a very relevant example as well. He was the one I was going to mention with Cotton Weary because throughout all the time in which he was trying to, paint himself as an innocent person,
Yeah.
Bundy absolutely loved the attention, and I think there are a lot of elements in this film that do touch on real life, and I think that in itself, I think what made it a little bit scary for me. I think Mickey even actually points the finger at Randy, saying, "Oh, he's got to be the killer. Why would he? He's harmless." Yeah, that's what they said about Dharma.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Let's face it; these guys are so hard to catch, is because they're chameleons. They blend into society. They're people that you very often don't suspect. I like in that scene actually. We'll get onto that scene now very shortly. But he actually mentions as well 5 slasher films that are not up there with Halloween or even Friday the 13th or whatever, but there's a couple of good ones. He mentions Splatter University, the house at the dorm that dripped blood, House on Sorority Row, Final Exam and Graduation Day, I believe.
I think that was one, but that was one hell of a rant. What's your scary movie? Showgirls. It was horrifying,
Yeah,
absolutely brilliant. I will say that. I mean, it's not a criticism against the film. I guess in terms of personal experience, I think what they did with Randy, I think like that was not. I think that was a not a bad call. I was just like, why?
it was a gut punch. I liked the move. I get what you're saying. Randy was a really popular character, but it was a gut punch. It evoked a reaction from the audience, and sometimes you got to take risks. And it was. Yeah, it was. I mean, with Scream. Let's talk about the other moment, because this is a moment that again was to be a huge gut punch. Dewey's death in Scream 2, which of course he did survive. Did you feel cheated?
I I don't know. I think because he survived the first one and he became very verbal kint in Scream 2 in terms of his sort of physical impairments, if you want to call it as such. I don't know. I think maybe that's part of the joke, perhaps. There's someone who just doesn't die. That could be the case with that.
He's
However,
actually harder to kill than Michael Myers, isn't he? He's actually got more lives in the cat. He may as well be Michael Myers. He may as well just tell Michael, take off your mask, take off your boiler suit, your coveralls. I'll be the new Myers. Because he really is there for comedy relief, isn't he? Dewey has become a character that's really, especially as the franchise has gone on.
oh yeah, do you know what? It kind of reminds me of that joke from Austin Powers with Mustafa, played by Will Ferrell. Like he says, "I'm still alive, but I'm very badly burnt." Or in the second film with was it Robin Swallows? She like they just don't die.
Yeah.
I think that was a character joke as well. Like this just like one character that just won't give up.
Yeah, it was a great sequence anyway. His death was impactful. Again, the music, it was a great moment. And speaking of great moments, I just want to quickly say something else. Quickly getting back to the cast, because I think this is quite notable actually. There's 4 cast members in Scream 2 that were all in TV shows at the time. Courtney Cox, Friends, which like 94. Sarah Michelle Gellar, of course, Buffy the Vampire Slayer had already started. Jerry O'Connell, Derek, was actually in... I'm not sure if you remember the sci-fi series called Sliders.
No.
Yeah, he was in that as well. He was one of the lead stars in that. And the other one is... oh, God, I'm struggling to remember now. There's one more. Oh, God, who was it? There's one more cast member that was in the TV series. And I've actually forgotten... Oh, Party of 5, Nev Campbell.
Very good.
So, yeah, quite notable. Of course, Laurie Metcalf was in Roseanne. And, quite a few TV stars that were actually in that film. But, yeah, getting back to, like, great scenes in this film, I think we both agree on this. One of the highlights of the movie, I thought it was a really good set piece, was the moment where they're in the car, trapped with a killer.
Oh,
and the
definitely.
car crash, and he's obviously very quickly dispatched the two FBI agents, and Sydney and Hallie have to climb over the killer's body in the car. What's your feelings on that whole scene?
It's an example of why Wes Craven is an absolute master of horror, because we're all just waiting for that moment. Oh, he could be up, or he's faking it. No, it really plays with the idea. You know what? He could just bounce up at any second, and the anticipation really is there. In fact, that was one bit that did get me cringing, like with anticipation when I first watched it, because I'm just like, we know what's going to happen, and yet there is a slight subversion of expectations. And I think only Wes Craven's only one of a few examples who could pull it off brilliantly.
Yeah, it was. You're just waiting for it, aren't you? You're just waiting for that jump scare. You're waiting for the moment, and it doesn't happen. And but yeah, it's a very effective scene. I'd love to know how the killer did get to the other side of the street, though, which is a bit of an unsolved mystery. And I'm not sure if they've got the Michael Myers art of teleportation there, or what. But the killer does get out and so forth. There's another little moment in this film that I love. Talking about kind of pop culture and everything. The bit where Randy actually mentions about the topless pictures of Courtney Cox, of Gail Weathers.
Yeah, they were just my face over Jennifer Aniston.
A great little nod to a co-star in Friends. Yeah, but also it was this was actually alluding as well to a real thing. By the way, before Scream 2 went into production, there were apparently topless pictures of Courtney Cox on the internet, and it was all fake. So
that doesn't surprise me.
They actually brought that. You can do it in Photoshop now, and they actually brought that up, addressed that in the movie.
Speaking of referencing things that happen to real life, Gail also mentions a line as well. The incident in the cinema with the slaughtered kids. They're gonna that's gonna boost the sales of Stab. This digging up on this, in I think mid-July time in 1991. Jeffrey Dahmer was caught. Around that time, another horror film, well, if you can call it a horror film, no, it's a crime horror film, had come out, and the sales went up by about 5 figures during the week, during and after the nation was covering Jeffrey Dahmer's capture, and that was The Silence of the Lambs. So that the theory that she mentions in the film actually became a partial reality in that real life.
Yeah. And it's like you said, it touches very close to home in the real world when it comes to murders. Mickey's motive is scary. Hers is less because she's on a classic case of revenge. He's doing it for the fame, the stardom. What people will do to be famous nowadays.
Which is again very Henry Lee Lucas and Otis Toole that we mentioned last week as well. That absolute fraudulent in what they were doing, and for the sake of for the sensationalized status.
Yep, Henry Lee Lucas I don't think can even be classified as a serial killer anymore. Obviously this is probably for another topic, another podcast and so forth. But just to quickly mention as well, another cameo in the film. I'm not sure how many people picked up on this, but the man that's actually interviewing Cotton Weary is actually Kevin Williamson, the screenwriter.
Which scene?
It's the scene where Cotton is being interviewed on TV.
Of course, yeah, okay, yeah. I was trying to think of. I was looking at the crowd, the interviews with the crowd.
No, I see Williamson. And also as well, he died back in 2001. May he rest in peace. But David Arquette's father, Louis Arquette, is actually the police chief in the movie.
I see that.
And there's actually just a quick little fleeting moment that I kind of like. It's where the cop comes up to him and he says, "Dewey," and he taps him on the shoulder and he says, "Chief, that's just father and son, just sharing a little scene together." Just a quick little moment. But
actually, just on one quick note, the other thing that I really like about Scream is that I think some of the best horror films have that one sweet moment of humanity in them. It's when Neve Campbell's boyfriend in the film, he starts having that really cheesy musical moment from Top Gun.
Yeah. I'm not actually a
It's
huge...
really
Yeah.
cheesy. It's really cheesy. However, I'm just like it reminded it's sweet and it's enough to actually be quite flattering as well. And part of me is just like it's these moments that make you go, it's not completely doom and gloom with these films. There is that nice little moment of
There's a fun
of
factor.
sweetness.
Yeah, they
Oh,
don't take
definitely.
themselves too seriously at times. At the end of the day, it's a postmodern slice of horror, and it was a heartbreaking moment, really, when he was shot by Mickey, because she started to doubt. Mickey put the seed of doubt in Sidney's head that he was the killer, that he was working with him.
And I think
And
that's what makes him far more sinister than that of Stu,
yeah,
because of that sense of manipulation that's right there. Of Mickey, I think, is far more just vile,
yeah.
as a complimentary way, is far more vile and more controlling of the situation and of others around him.
Yeah, he was a good guy. He was a good guy. And obviously, he became a suspect, let's face it. I think nearly all of us saw him as a suspect the moment where he goes in the house and he's lying there and he's cut on the arm, but it's missed all major arteries. And then echoes of Billy Loomis. So I think,
Oh,
yeah, for a lot of people, he was a suspect.
and to be honest, I actually think in a way, Scream 2 definitely plays on more on the idea that everyone's a suspect. I think because we've been this first round before, we think we kind of know what's going on here. However, it's very disarming. I think it's definitely more effective the second time round
Yeah,
because you think it's going to be the same. However,
yeah.
we're lost.
There's a great little, another little moment as well. We'll quickly talk about the Cece murder, obviously played by Sarah Michelle Gellar, who was obviously only I Know What You Did Last Summer just a few months prior. Two slasher movies in 1 year. Obviously her murder in the sorority house, kind of a when a stranger calls kind of thing going on there. And of course, thrown off the balcony, etc. I loved the little nod, because I know you want to talk about this quickly. But I love the little nod of Nosferatu. She's Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and the movie she's watching on TV is like the granddaddy of vampire films, 1922's Nosferatu. I thought that was a nice little touch.
There you go. This is Wes Craven we're talking about, and I think the note I think you were referring to is that there's something weird with the fact that she's just her career-defining moment is in Buffy. The first season just kicked about. I'm pretty sure it was pretty darn popular when it came out. But then to have her in a cameo in which she is essentially the just a slasher victim, part of me is like, does that work? Does that really work, or is that a little sort of a step back? But then again, I suppose with the other slasher film that she was just in beforehand, maybe that's forgiving.
Yeah, I mean, she didn't play a major part in the story or anything like that. She was just someone there to really, kind of up the body count, I guess. But obviously, she had the other scene that she was in. I know there was one scene in the sorority party that she was supposed to be in, but I believe that scene was actually cut. But she was actually, in the film class, and she's the one that obviously says to, because with Mickey having apparently a hard-on for Cameron, at the end he says to Sydney, "You've got a Sarah Connor thing going on, a Linda Hamilton thing going on." Sorry.
Yes, he does. Yeah.
He's got a thing for Cameron, but he's right. She has got a Sarah Connor and Ellen Ripley kind of thing going on here, and there's even a little moment in the studio where the killer's after Dewey and Gale, where he picks up the killer. This would obviously be Mickey, 100%. Mickey picks up the chair and he's trying to bash the glass through. That was a scene reminiscent of Aliens, where Ripley picks up the thing and tries to smash it. Do you remember?
I didn't. To be honest, I didn't necessarily put two and two together. I think I would have seen it more obvious if, say, it was Courtney Cox doing it. However, now that you brought up, no, I can see the reference.
Yeah. Because the rules of sequels, as Randy states, the death total is greater. This film does have a higher body count. There's not much in it, but it does have a higher body count. The murder scene's more elaborate, more blood and gore. Would you agree with that in this film?
Oh yeah, I would say so. There's definitely more of a a potential focus on the blood, particularly with, say, Stu's death. And weirdly enough, even though it's very brief, if you look at Stab at the opening, that you see more blood being done to Heather Graham's betrayal, if you like, as opposed to the blood that you would have seen in the first Scream. So there is that sense of sensationalism that would carry on. So I in a way, definitely, particularly with the car crash with that metal pole.
Oh yeah. Rather bizarrely as well, the third one he's cut off. Now in the trailer, you actually hear it. The third one, by the way, was never ever assumed that the killer is dead. But that line was actually cut from the movie, but it actually found it was actually in the trailer. Never assumed that the killer is dead. I think, to be honest, with Scream 2, I don't know. Would you say it's better than the first film, or would you certainly say it belongs in the same league? Would you put it on par with the first movie?
Oh, easily on par. I think there are, on the one hand, because of the, I guess you could say, the darker tone and the darker elements, the more sort of grounded topic matters, you could say there's more to possibly talk about in real life scenarios. However, I think, as Kim Newman rightfully points out, the simple thing is it just suffers for being not as original as the original.
You're right. I mean, I think it does a lot right. It does a lot right, but there's always going to be that thing. The first one is the one that kind of set the template, if you will. It's the one that, I think, to be honest, I mean, I would actually say that Scream 2, it's a lot better than it had any right to be. I think it's only the first two Scream films can I genuinely say that I love. I do love the first two. We're obviously for a later podcast and so forth, because the reason I ask you is because Scream 2, believe it or not, Siskel and Roger Ebert, two of the biggest film critics out there, loved the film but didn't like the first.
That doesn't surprise me. Then again, I think Roger Ebert, I recall, he did give it the same star rating, and was very understanding. But I think I remember he saying, you're more to appreciate it if you are familiar with the Dead Teenager films. Which is interesting because both of them were never big fans of horror.
No.
And so that in itself is kind of surprising that Siskel himself was a bigger fan, considering this is the man who supposedly walked out of Maniac after the car shooting sequence.
Yeah. Yeah, Ebert would rarely ever give a slasher movie, a slasher film, a good review. But Scream 2, he liked it a lot more than the first Scream. I mean, I don't know if you've heard, but do you know what the original title of Scream 2 was going to be? There were a couple of titles that they were kind of toying about with, and these are bad titles. Scream Again and Scream Louder. I think they're bad titles. Don't get me wrong, there's absolutely nothing original about Scream 2, just putting a 2 behind it, but simple, Scream Again and Scream Louder, just, they didn't do anything for me.
See, for me, the only reason they'd consider Scream Again is because of the film Scream and Scream Again with Vincent Price, Peter Cushing, and Christopher Lee. I think that would be the only reason they would have considered that title. However, straightforward, Scream 2, plain and simple. To be honest, though, I don't think it discouraged too many people. I mean, it made almost as much money as the first Scream.
It did. It was a big box office
Very
success.
Close.
Yeah.
Very close, like only a few $100,000 difference, within less than a year. That's impressive.
I don't think Scream was ever... I don't think even Dimension Films Miramax were even anticipating Scream to be as successful as it was. But, Craven needed a hit. I mean, Wes Craven's New Nightmare came out a couple of years before Scream. Now, I think Wes Craven's New Nightmare is a great postmodern slice of horror, but it wasn't a big box office success or anything like that. And it had actually been some time since Craven had actually had a successful film. Randy brings it up in Scream 2. It's an interesting point, actually, because in a way it's making some commentary, possibly about Wes Craven's New Nightmare. Now, I don't remember the quote word for word, but he says something along the lines of, if you make it too complex, complicated, you lose your core audience.
Oh yeah, no, was it? He said something like that in the first Scream, the beautiful simplicity. But besides, if it gets too complicated, you lose your target audience. But he does say something in Scream 2 about increasing the blood and the gore. That's certainly going to keep your core audience of some sort.
Was it in the first film that he mentions that then?
I believe so. Yeah, when he's talking about the motives of the killer and it losing your target audience if it's too complicated.
Okay. Maybe I don't know if I'm kind of meshing two of the lines together from two of the films, but yeah, it's kind of commentary about. I think that's what Wes Craven's New Nightmare did, because Wes Craven's New Nightmare was, it was postmodern, set in the real world. The Nightmare on Elm Street franchise, it's just a movie franchise, etc. I think there was a lot of Nightmare on Elm Street fans that kind of veered away from it because of that aspect. It has actually become a lot more appreciated over the years and so forth, but Wes Craven directing it, for me personally, I think the two best films in the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise were both directed by Craven.
Oh, that goes to that question. I'd be surprised if anyone would ever make an argument against that.
Yeah, I mean, Nightmare on Elm Street 3 Dream Warriors, I really do like. I think it's a good sequel. Obviously, Wes Craven didn't direct, but he did produce. He had a lot of creative input on that film because obviously he, along with a lot of other people, were very disappointed with Freddy's Dead 2, Freddy's Revenge. So, I think all in all, Scream was a really good sequel, probably better than it had any right to be. Again, a great screenplay, I think, from Kevin Williamson. It was a movie that certainly had some great memorable moments. I think, personally, I find the opening just as memorable as the opening from the first film. How about yourself?
I think I certainly lives up to the desire to go further, and I think it definitely taps. I think there's, weird enough, I'd say there's as much of substance in terms of tension and talking points as the first film. I think it doesn't have that draw in, I think, with subverted expectations with the likes of Drew Barrymore. However, do you know what? I could easily label it in the top 10 sort of slasher openings or maybe even horror openings because it hits a nerve.
It does. A cinema, a place of safety. It just, the whole moment, that moment she realises that that's not her boyfriend sitting there. Phil Stevens, that's his name. I've just remembered her boyfriend's name. I was calling him Stephen earlier. Stephen Orff was obviously Casey Becker's boyfriend from the first Scream. But yeah, again, like the first movie, it really sets the tone of the movie. And Jada Pinkett, when she's stabbed and just that look and scream, it's what a way to kick off that movie. I think it's fair to say we both really like Scream 2, and hopefully, what do you reckon? Get onto the third film at some point?
Well, I suppose we might as well make a franchise out of it.
Yeah, we can get onto the third film, which I'm not ashamed to say I don't like as much as the first two. It still has some merit. There's still some things to like there. But I think with the third film, it did start to become kind of a parody of itself, almost. We'll save that for the near future. So I think that concludes today's episode. Oh, just to quickly mention as well, I did actually tally these up. There are a whopping 34 films mentioned or alluded to in Scream 2.
That sounds about right. I'd love if there was more references in Scream 2 than Scream 1.
I think there may be. I'm not sure. It's a close one. I'd have to actually tally them both up. But yeah, there's a lot of movies alluded to or referenced. So that concludes today's episode of Talk and Stalk. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back again soon enough to haunt you, torment you, and do whatever else we want to do to you.
Yep, thank you very much for joining us once again. On a final note, we'd like to say that we certainly do requests. So if there's any particular horror film that you want us to, gush our love over or to argue over, please let us know. And always remember, don't blame the movies.
And just one quick thing before I do forget. Just a quick shout out to a friend of mine that has a podcast called Entertainment Talk. He's podcasting on a regular basis, films, video games, television shows, you name it. His channel is Entertainment Talk, if you want to listen to his podcasts. And that's it for today's episode, and take care.